Welcome to San Joaquin Spotlight, a public affairs program featuring conversations about life in the central San Joaquin Valley. This program is brought to you in partnership between KFSR 90.7 FM and CMAC Fresno. I'm your host, Sevag Tateosian. Today, the studio is buzzing with activity behind the scenes. We've got a crew of volunteers making this and every production possible. And in the studio, we have Alec Kimmel. He's with an organization called Shifting Gears. Alec, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So Shifting Gears, talk about what this organization is.
Well, Sevag, the Shifting Gears is actually more like an idea than an organization.
Okay.
The organization is a coalition at this point. We have 4 groups right now that are currently officially endorsing this. But to put it succinctly, what Shifting Gears is it's the idea that we can provide viable transportation for the underserved in Fresno.
So it's like a group of organizations that have come together and have said, listen, folks, we need to do more with transportation. I mean, am I right?
Yeah, more or less. We're talking about the California, the Central California Regional Obesity Prevention Program. We're talking about the Environmental Justice Network. We're talking about unions.
So you've got a lot of organizations behind this concept. And, you know, one of the things that your organization promotes, or this idea promotes, is riding your bike, correct?
Correct.
Talk about riding your bike. I mean, you mentioned an organization involved in obesity in this. So there are really health initiatives or health benefits to riding your bike. Absolutely.
The World Health Organization in 2007 actually said, among others, that there's a direct connection between health and being active in your day-to-day life. And we have really kind of become a sedentary society, which is why you see this proliferation of diseases related to cardiovascular, diabetes. All of those things can be reduced with just 30 minutes of exercise a day, which, if you rode your bike around town, you would get.
I want to ask you about that. So I go to the gym and I'll do the elliptical machine, and it says I've done 400 or 500 calories. I feel good about myself afterwards, and I'm jazzed. But riding a bike for half an hour, will it also help?
Absolutely. In some ways, it might be more useful because it's transportation, and so it's getting you somewhere too.
Other cities, and I want to talk about San Francisco because I accidentally drove on a street on San Francisco where apparently it's all bicycles only. So here I am in San Francisco on this center divide or street or wherever I was with all bicycles around me, and I thought to myself, wow, this is incredible. So cities like San Francisco have already adopted this kind of motion, correct?
Correct.
How do we get there in Fresno?
Although I have to add a caveat. What we're looking at is something that very few cities in California, or maybe even in the country, have done. And here's the thing that shocks a lot of people, is that Fresno actually has the 5th best bicycle network in the entire nation.
Wait. Repeat that. The 5th best bicycle network in the nation?
That's right.
What does that mean?
That means that we have the rated 5th best for the infrastructure, for the ability of people to ride their bike around the city, out of every city in the U.S.
You know, a lot of people don't know that. I didn't know that, and I'm involved in what's going on in the community. So how do you get that message out? I mean, obviously shows like this, but you know, when you're out and about, let's say at a reception or at a mixer or something, are you promoting stuff like that?
I'm trying to, absolutely. Trying to get more people interested in this every day. And the thing is, that you have to ask yourself, okay, well, if we have this great bicycle network, then why is it that nobody seems to be riding their bicycle?
I agree with that. I would love to ride my bike to work, but sometimes I don't think it's feasible.
Right. And really what it is, we started looking into this. This is actually what starting to get into what shifting gears actually is. The idea came about because we said, okay, well, how can you have a bicycle system, stuff that's on the ground, that's ready to use, and that's working? How can you have that? Something that our city has for the last 10 or 20 years spent $36 million on.
Wow, that's incredible.
How can you have that and only 1% of Fresnans use it? How is that possible? And so we started looking into it, and what happened was we discovered a growing body of research that basically says that if you're talking about a certain group of people who may not necessarily be experienced cyclists. It's one thing if you're cycling all the time every day, if it's a hobby, if you're just an enthusiast. But it's another thing if you're somebody who's a minority, who maybe belongs to a group of low income folks who may not have the ability to buy a car. It's one thing if you belong to that set of people and you're trying to get around town using your bike in areas where you just have to be able to go there, but there's cars moving literally right past you, maybe as far away from you as I am, at like 45, 50 miles an hour. It's dangerous. It's dangerous. And so what happened was we said, okay, well, when you look at a map of what's on the ground and what's being proposed, what you see is a lot of paint, basically. You see bike lanes on streets. And a lot of these are being proposed in high traffic areas. So we said, well, how do you get around this? How do you get it to where those women, minorities, people of low income, people of color, youth, and if you're a pedestrian, the disabled to a certain extent as well, somebody who's just on foot, how do you get it to those people are making use of this infrastructure that we're supposed to have? And what it really is a change in philosophy. Hence the name, Shifting Gears. So if you see that map right there.
Yeah, and let's go ahead and show the
Sure.
map right now so that the audience can see what we're talking about. So let's go ahead and show that map. So what's going on in this map?
What you see in that map is those blue lines are basically the canals that are running through Fresno. Fresno was built on two things. It was built on the movement of water for the use of agriculture, and it was built because it was near the railroad. So right now, you can see how that map changed. And you see where those red lines are?
Mm-hmm.
Those red lines are what we call professionally Class 1 bicycle facilities.
And you're going to explain Class 1.
I'll explain 1, 2, and 3 right now. 1 is everything that is completely separate from the road. So trails, essentially. Something that doesn't even connect, doesn't even touch the same facility that a car would use.
So completely separate. If I'm on a Class 1 designated bicycle lane or bicycle area, I'm not going to have the fear of getting run over by cars.
Not unless you have to cross a street at some point, and that's just a small fraction
Okay.
of your trip, as opposed to being there the whole time. Now, Class 2 is your bike lanes. That's where you have a stripe on the side of the road and a sign that clearly says bikes ride everywhere between this stripe and the curb. And when it's done right, it's actually supposed to be 2 stripes that separate it from the curb so that your bicycle doesn't run into the curb when you're traveling. But there's a lot of wiggle room that's taken place on that concept. And I'd be happy to send you some examples later on, but you kind of get the idea for now.
You've kind of found a niche, and it's this shifting gears concept. There could have been a ton of other things that you could have been involved in. There's a lot of nonprofits and volunteer opportunities, but you've chosen this one. Why?
Well, Sevag, I like Fresno. I didn't always.
I do too, for the record.
I didn't always feel that way, but it really began when I was working for an architecture firm back, well, maybe 8 years ago now. And they were doing restoration work downtown. And that really sort of opened my eyes to, in a way that I had never had my eyes open before. And I said, hey, there's a lot of good stuff going on in this town. There's a lot of rich history here. There's a lot of culture. And if enough people knew about it and enough people did something, we could really be a special place in California. We could become big. And it was that. Now, so I'm interested in a lot of different things. But the reason why I chose this is because chief among my interests is transportation. And it always has been. I've always been interested in, well, what exactly is it that gets people where they need to go?
And here, it's our cars. Do you see a shift in that in the near future or in the future?
I'm hoping so. If you'll allow me to get back to shifting gears for a minute.
Sure.
So you have your Class 1 and your Class 2. Now, Class 2 is composing the majority of what has been built and what is being proposed. As I mentioned before, that's $36 million that our city's already spent on a system that only 1% of the population is using. They would like to continue that, and according to the most recent bike master plan, have more lanes on the ground, in addition to some trails, at a cost of $1.3 billion. Now, does that make sense to you? That we should spend our tax dollars on a system that only 1% of us are going to use? So here's what Shifting Gears says in a nutshell. Shifting Gears is a proposal, it's an idea for a complete Class 1 system, essentially a loop around the city. And how we would accomplish this in a time when we're still in the midst of the greatest recession that we've seen in the last 50 years, is we would use our existing resources in the form of right-of-way. As I mentioned, railroad lines and canals crisscross our city. If you were able to build bike trails alongside those systems, one is being used to move freight, the other is being used to move water, how about making them move people as well? If you do that, then, as you saw on the map, those red lines start to form something that resembles a loop that goes around the city. And the best way to think of it is the same way we think of cars. Freeways are separated from the other roadways. You don't have to deal with stop signs. You don't have to deal with lights. It's supposed to be a facility intended for traffic moving at high speeds. We could do the same thing for bicycles. And we're not actually proposing anything that's different from what the city's proposing. We're just saying, instead of throwing all of that money at everything in the kitchen sink, let's prioritize this. Let's look at what our women, what our minorities, what the bulk of our population is actually going to use according to the research. And this could help Fresno in so many ways.
Well, let me ask you a question about riding your bike. By the way, I have 5 bikes at my house. So my wife and I have different bikes for mountains and beach cruisers and stuff like that. But I would love to ride my bike to work, but I'm in a shirt and tie, I'm in a suit, and sometimes it gets wrinkled. I don't feel comfortable putting it in a backpack. What advice would you give someone like me? Because if I rode my bike to work, I guarantee you I could be there in 35 minutes, which is not that bad. But I just don't want to deal with having to change at work, or now my outfit is all wrinkled up because it's in a bag, or I'm riding a bicycle in my outfit and I'm sweating.
That's a good question. I know some people who ride to work, and sometimes it's a situation where you have a locker at work, or you have a change of clothes that you keep at work, and that way you don't have to worry about them getting clean or having to change into a dirty or sweaty set of clothes or whatever. So there is that. I think that would probably be what I would suggest, is to just, if you can find a way to, keep a change of clothes at work, then that could probably be the best way to deal with that.
Do a lot of people ride to work? I mean, I see people riding their bike in the morning, in the afternoon, at night, but you would know this answer more than me. Are there a lot of people out there who commute to work? And I know a lot is a general word, but I mean, in your opinion, are there people out there riding their bike to work?
There certainly are. But as I said, those people don't tend to be very many probably because of the system that we have. You basically have your group of experienced cyclists, and then you have everybody else. And everybody else has been raised on the idea that the only way to get around is in a car. Or they try to take the bus. And while our bus system in Fresno is actually decent, I had the pleasure of riding it myself in recent times, it is not something that we can guarantee having in the future. It's well known that transportation dollars, like everything else in this day and age, are being cut. And they tend to be cut more with public transportation than they do with the car and with private transportation. So the beauty of the bike, really, as a mode of actual transportation, is that it's something that, far from polluting the environment and causing more health problems, actually decreases emissions if enough people are using it. You're not going to consume any energy riding a bike outside of the breakfast you just ate. And it's something that is cheap. So people who can't necessarily afford a car are still going to be able to have private transportation. The drawbacks, as you mentioned, are, the change of clothes and just moving things around in general.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I would love to ride my bike to work, but sometimes I think, oh, it's so cold in the morning, might as well get in my car, start that ignition, and, I'm at work in 10 minutes. But, I want to ask the question about access to bikes.
Sure.
Now, are you finding that people who want to ride bikes have them, or, there are ways for those people who get bikes? I mean, there are some nonprofits that even fix bikes for free, I've heard. So talk about if there's access to bikes for some of the low-income communities.
I believe that there is. I don't know that it would be, I don't know if you'd see these people riding a Schwinn anytime soon, but you definitely see a lot of people riding bikes, and bikes are great for short distances. I mean, in some ways, the shifting gears plan is sort of deceptive, because you're not going to necessarily ride across town on a bike unless you don't have that much, time on your hand, or sorry, you have tons of time on your hands is what I mean. But there's so many trips that we make by car that we don't really need to. Most of the emissions that go into the air from a car are from cars idling when they're stopped at stoplights. And that tends to happen more when you're on shorter trips because you're using shorter segments. So what shifting gears does is it basically encourages us to start thinking about bikes as a real mode of transportation. And getting back to your question on whether this is something that people would want to do in inclement weather, and I know it can go the other way too. I mean, we've got some brutal summers here.
Oh yeah, 110 degrees.
But I would point to the Class 1 facility that we actually have, which is the Sugarpine Trail along Clovis Avenue. Planting trees and building that trail had Fresno and Clovis set a world record for volunteer hours spent on any given project.
So you had, well, not you, but the community, we had volunteers set a
right.
world record and plant trees and beautify bike trails essentially, or?
Right, right. This actually happened back in the 90s, I believe. And at the time, it was this collaborative project that really kind of came together because people wanted the bikes. And that's really the key here. We've run into a lot of questions when we've been talking about this in terms of the fine-tuning of it, the engineering, you know, how exactly this is going to work. And our position is, well, that's great that people are asking those questions. You know, yes, let's think about this. Let's get into the details, but let's not get into the details yet, because right now what needs to happen is we need to spread the word. We need to make this something that people are aware of, that people are talking to each other about, and especially that people are talking to their elected officials and government officials about.
How are the elected officials doing in this community? I mean, do they get it? I know sometimes we hear in different topics in different cities, people say, oh, the elected officials, they don't get it. They don't understand. So in regards to this topic, do they get it?
Well, some of them are starting to get it, I suppose is one way of saying it. This body of research that we've been looking at is a new body of research. And so it hasn't really filtered into the consciousness yet. Another reason that we're trying to sort of spread the word on shifting gears and on bicycle use as something that all people can use, that you don't necessarily have to take a couple of classes and go and, you know, buy yourself a Lycra suit in order to do. I think that there is a disconnect. I think that there's sort of an established way of thinking about this that really needs to be challenged. And the idea is, first of all, that you shouldn't build anything south of Shaw because there's no money to do it, and that your public is going to support this system that maybe they aren't even aware of, much less use. So that is probably the most nuanced way I can answer that question. We have talked with some officials, and some of them do get it. Some of them do see it, and we kind of went quickly through those maps before. But if there's any way we could get them back, there was a map there of another city.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. And we're running out of time this week, so let's now show this map of the other city, and then I'll have you talk about it, and we'll go from there. So here's the next map.
Okay, so this is the city of Merced, and Merced was able to get trails put down on its creeks. I believe that's the North Bear Creek right there, and going through some of its lesser used streets. There was actually a national race that was held in Merced because of the quality of their bike system.
That's incredible. I mean, looking at that map, I saw a lot of green. What is that green that I saw?
The green is the proposed bike trails.
So there, I mean, Merced is really, really aggressively taking on this bike trail thing.
Oh yes, they are. They very much are, and we're falling behind, which is something to say considering that we're the bigger city, maybe the more prosperous city. But Merced really took it upon themselves to embrace that culture and to embrace that way of thinking. And there's no reason why we couldn't. The precedent is there for both the cost, the benefits to our quality of life here, and tourism. I mean, people actually came to Merced to use this thing from all over the country.
Well, I remember when Lance Armstrong was riding through Clovis, here, our neighbor Clovis, and there were thousands of people out waiting for that group of bicyclists to come through. And could you imagine the amount of economic revenue generated to those businesses because of the people that were waiting? So I think you're right on that one.
Right, right. So
we're running out of time this week, but if you had a magic wand, every guest has a magic wand. So now you get the magic wand, and now you can tell us what your wish would be with that magic wand.
my wish would be, quite frankly, to see Fresno become the next great California city, in so many words. And primarily, I would like to see that happen with respect to how we are treating our environment and our health. I think that we have the ability to do great things in this city. And I say, let's get to it, you know, but let's be smart about it, is what Shifting Gears is really saying.
How can people find out more information about Shifting Gears, your partners, more information on how to get involved in this advocacy or this promotion of cycling?
Besides watching this program. We have a Facebook page. It's the Shifting Gears Fresno in the URL. Like us on Facebook. If you have questions for us, we have an email account, shiftyg123, that's the numerals 123, all one word, all lowercase, at gmail.com. Send something to that and we will get back to you.
Thank you so much. We're out of time this week on our program.
Thank you, Sevag.
That's all for this edition of San Joaquin Spotlight. To the volunteer crew that made this and every production possible, thank you. We couldn't do this without you. To our audience members watching us on CMAC and listening to us on KFSR, hope you enjoyed the program this week with Alec Kimmel talking about the importance of cycling. I'm your host, Sevag Tateosian. Tune in next week to a new edition.